The women remember how JonBenet's death cast a dark cloud over the pageant world.
Pageants was a big part of my life, and there was such a stigma around that I didn't want to go there for a while.
Today, Brandy works as a kindergarten teacher. Thumper is a hairstylist. And Brianne is a middle school history teacher. In fact, she loves history so much, her body is covered with history-themed tattoos.
They get to learn off history from me. No, I mean, it's fun. It's a good conversation starter. The kids love it.
Looking at these three women, we can't help but wonder what JonBenet's life might have been like had she lived.
The fateful night of December 25th, 1996. Deep within the shadows of the Ramsey household, a disturbing tale began to unfold like a nightmare slowly materializing in the darkness. As Christmas night settled over Boulder, Colorado, with its blanket of snow and twinkling lights that should have brought joy and peace, 9-year-old Burke Ramsey would later admit to something that would haunt investigators for decades. He had crept downstairs after everyone else had gone to bed, drawn by the irresistible pull of a mysterious toy that beckoned to him from the depths of the house. The Ramsey home stood as a monument to success and prosperity, its grand rooms filled with the remnants of what should have been a perfect Christmas celebration. Wrapped presents lay scattered beneath the towering tree, their colorful paper catching the faint glow of Christmas lights that continued to twinkle in the darkness. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing that this night would forever change the lives of everyone within its walls. In the master bedroom upstairs, John and Patsy Ramsey slept peacefully, unaware that their world was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. But down in the living room, something far more sinister was taking shape. Burke, who should have been dreaming of Christmas morning adventures and new toys, instead found himself wide awake and restless. The excitement of Christmas Day had given way to something else entirely, a compulsion that would drive him from the safety of his bedroom into the darkened corridors of the house below. What exactly drew him downstairs remains one of the most chilling mysteries of this case, a question that continues to echo through the halls of justice like a ghost seeking resolution. In a chilling 1998 interview that would echo through the corridors of criminal justice for years to come, John Ramsey painted a vivid picture of that morning of December 26th that would become seared into the collective consciousness of America. He recalled with haunting clarity, as if the memory had been burned into his retinas with acid, how he had tried desperately to coax Burke to bed the night before. But the boy had lingered like a specter in the living room beside the Christmas tree, mesmerized by what John described with unsettling precision as some kind of little square car elevator or a car garage repair thing, elevators run up and down and stuff, little microcars. The specificity of John's recollection was both remarkable and disturbing. Why would such minute details about a simple toy remain so crystal clear in his memory after such a traumatic event? The memory burned into John's mind with crystalline precision. Burke's reluctance to leave that spot by the tree, his strange attachment to his possessions so intense and overwhelming that even amid the chaos and terror of JonBenet's disappearance the following morning, he delayed his departure to Fleet White's house. The image of Burke clutching desperately at a toy or his beloved Nintendo, even as police swarmed the house and his sister lay missing, painted a portrait of a child whose priorities seemed fundamentally disconnected from the gravity of the situation unfolding around him. Years would pass, like a slow-moving storm, before Burke himself would break his silence. And when he finally did, his words carried an ominous weight that seemed to settle over the investigation like a shroud. In the Burke Dr. Phil transcript, the grown man's voice trembled slightly as he recounted that fateful night, his admission hanging in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. "I remember being downstairs after everyone else was in bed," he confessed, each word carefully measured, yet somehow laden with unspoken implications. The simplicity of his statement belied the complexity of what it revealed. A 9-year-old boy alone in the darkness of a house where something terrible was about to unfold. When pressed about whether he had used a flashlight to conceal his midnight activities, a detail that would become crucial to investigators trying to piece together the timeline of that night. His response was eerily vague, almost deliberately so. "I don't remember. I just remember being downstairs. I remember this toy." The selective nature of his memory, remembering the toy with perfect clarity while remaining fuzzy about other potentially incriminating details, struck investigators as suspicious. How could someone remember a specific toy so vividly while forgetting whether they used a flashlight to navigate through their own home in complete darkness? This seemingly innocent revelation would become entangled in a web of forensic evidence that would chill investigators to the bone and transform a missing child case into something far more sinister. The discovery of undigested pineapple in JonBenet's stomach during the autopsy created a timeline that contradicted everything the family claimed to know about that night, like a puzzle piece that refused to fit into the picture they had painted for authorities. The pineapple evidence became a smoking gun that no one could explain away. Fresh pineapple, partially digested, sitting in JonBenet's stomach like an accusation. Someone had fed her this fruit in the hours before her death, yet the family maintained with unwavering certainty that she had gone straight to bed upon returning home from the Christmas party. The implications were staggering. Either the family was lying about the timeline, or someone else had been in the house that night, someone who had taken the time to prepare and serve pineapple to a little girl who should have been safely asleep in her bed. John Ramsey's denial was absolute and unwavering, delivered with the fervor of a man fighting for his very life and reputation. JonBenet had not eaten pineapple after their return home, he insisted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. She was sound asleep, he maintained, tucked safely in her bed like any normal child on Christmas night. But then came his most haunting and bizarre hypothesis, one that would puzzle investigators and observers for decades. If she had eaten pineapple, it could only have been from someone she knew and trusted, someone like Santa Claus. The Santa Claus reference sent shockwaves through the investigation, not because it provided clarity, but because it seemed to deliberately obscure the truth. Here was a grieving father, supposedly desperate to find his daughter's perpetrator, offering up a fictional character as a potential suspect. The absurdity of the statement was matched only by its disturbing implications. Was this a man grasping at straws in his grief, or was this a calculated attempt to misdirect the investigation toward an impossible suspect? Patsy Ramsey's 2000 interview painted an equally disturbing picture that would haunt investigators long after the words were spoken. Her voice carried the weight of maternal certainty as she expressed serious doubt that JonBenet would have prepared pineapple for herself in the dead of night, her tone suggesting this was simply inconceivable. Someone must have served it to her, she declared with the conviction of a mother who knew her child's habits intimately, the implications of her words rippling through the investigation like tremors before an earthquake. If JonBenet hadn't prepared the pineapple herself, and the family claimed they were all asleep, then who had been awake and active in the Ramsey house during those crucial hours? The theory that emerged from investigator Kolar read like something torn from the pages of a psychological thriller, a scenario so disturbing that it challenged everything the public thought they knew about this case. According to this hypothesis, Patsy had served Burke tea and pineapple downstairs in the kitchen, creating a late-night snack session that the family had somehow forgotten to mention to investigators. Later, in this terrifying scenario, JonBenet, still hungry in the darkness and perhaps awakened by sounds from below, had crept down like a ghost through the silent house to snag a piece of pineapple from her brother's bowl. In this chilling reconstruction of events, such an innocent act, a little girl simply wanting a piece of fruit, had allegedly triggered Burke's rage in a moment that would change everything forever. The theory suggested that this simple act of sibling food sharing had escalated into something catastrophic, leading Burke to strike her with a flashlight in a moment of fury that would transform a normal Christmas night into a family's worst nightmare. The banality of the motive, anger over stolen pineapple, made the theory even more disturbing, suggesting that the most tragic events can spring from the most ordinary moments of childhood conflict. The confession that made no sense. In the twisted psychology of criminal behavior, Burke's decision to admit sneaking downstairs after bedtime stands as one of the most perplexing elements of this entire case. His confession serves no apparent beneficial purpose for someone desperately trying to distance themselves from a crime scene. Instead, it's like a man throwing himself into quicksand while claiming he's trying to escape drowning. The confession came during what should have been a carefully orchestrated public relations campaign designed to rehabilitate the Ramsey family's image. After years of silence and legal maneuvering, Burke finally emerged from the shadows to speak with Dr. Phil McGraw, a venue chosen specifically for its sympathetic atmosphere and controlled environment. Yet, in this supposedly safe space, surrounded by media consultants and legal advisors who had spent decades crafting the family's narrative, Burke delivered a bombshell admission that defied all strategic logic. What makes this confession even more bewildering is the timing of its revelation. By the time Burke sat down with Dr. Phil, the case had been dissected by countless investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths. Every detail of that Christmas night had been analyzed under microscopic scrutiny. Burke and his legal team knew exactly what evidence existed, what theories had been proposed, and which details would prove most damaging to his reputation. Yet, despite having this complete roadmap of investigative landmines, he chose to step directly onto one of the most explosive pieces of evidence in the entire case. The psychological implications of this admission are staggering when viewed through the lens of criminal behavior analysis. Guilty individuals typically craft alibis that place them as far from the crime scene as possible during the critical time frame. They create narratives of deep sleep, of being in different locations, of having witnesses who can vouch for their whereabouts. They don't voluntarily admit to being awake and active in the exact location where evidence suggests the crime began to unfold. Burke's confession flies in the face of every established pattern of self-preservation that investigators have come to expect from potential suspects. Burke's admission seems strategically timed, yet strategically disastrous, like a chess player deliberately sacrificing his queen while claiming he's protecting his king. This revelation actually places him, like a chess piece, in the exact location where key evidence was discovered during the critical time frame when the tragic events unfolded, creating a timeline that investigators had been struggling to establish for decades. It's mind-boggling why anyone would voluntarily provide information that positions them in such a compromising location, unless there were hidden strategic reasons lurking beneath the surface, reasons that perhaps made more sense in the context of family loyalty than personal self-preservation. The timing and nature of this confession bears an eerie resemblance to John Ramsey's admission about illegally smuggling cigars into the country. Both admissions seem carefully crafted to present minor wrongdoings as a smokescreen, a way of appearing brutally honest about small transgressions while potentially deflecting attention from matters far more serious and sinister. The cigar smuggling admission by John Ramsey had raised eyebrows among investigators for its seemingly gratuitous nature. Here was a man whose daughter had been found dead in his basement, yet he felt compelled to confess to a relatively minor customs violation that had nothing to do with the case at hand. The parallel between father and son's confession suggests a family strategy of controlled transparency, admit to smaller wrongdoings to establish credibility while carefully avoiding more damaging revelations. This pattern of selective honesty creates an illusion of cooperation while actually maintaining strict control over the narrative. The theory proposed by investigator Kohler about Burke being upset over Christmas presents adds another layer of psychological complexity to understanding his motivations that night, like peeling back the layers of a disturbed mind to reveal the childhood frustrations that can sometimes explode into catastrophic consequences. According to this hypothesis, if Burke was indeed simmering with frustration about not receiving certain Christmas gifts or being dissatisfied with what he did receive, This emotional powder keg could have influenced his behavior and decision-making in ways that would prove catastrophic for the entire family. However, this theory crumbles under scrutiny when you consider how much Burke treasured his Nintendo 64 system, a devotion so intense it bordered on obsession, representing not just a gaming console, but a portal to a world where he could exercise complete control over his environment. The Nintendo 64 represented more than just entertainment for Burke. It symbolized power, control, and mastery in a way that few other possessions could match for a 9-year-old boy. The fact that he transported his entire gaming system with him when he was whisked away to the White House that morning demonstrates just how important this particular possession was to him, like a security blanket for his digital soul that provided comfort and familiarity in a world that had suddenly become chaotic and unpredictable. If the Nintendo 64 was significant enough for him to clutch during such a chaotic and traumatic morning when most children would be focused on the immediate crisis surrounding them, it raises disturbing questions about why he would have abandoned it the night before in favor of any other toy waiting in the darkness downstairs. The Christmas presents theory also raises questions about Burke's psychological state during what should have been the most joyful time of year for any child. Christmas morning had always been a sacred ritual in the Ramsey household, a time when material abundance was displayed in overwhelming fashion. If Burke was genuinely upset about his gifts, it suggests a level of entitlement and disappointment that goes beyond normal childhood reactions. It paints a picture of a boy whose expectations had been set so high that even a generous Christmas haul could leave him feeling cheated and resentful. The ongoing discussions about whether Burke used a flashlight that night reveal a web of contradictions that threatens to unravel the family's entire narrative, like a house of cards built on a foundation of lies and half-truths. The conflicting statements about various pieces of evidence, like baseball bats, create a puzzle where the pieces seem deliberately scattered, as if someone had taken a completed picture and intentionally jumbled it to prevent anyone from seeing the complete image. John and Patsy both claimed ignorance about the ownership and appearance of various items discovered at the scene, including baseball bats and flashlights. Yet Burke later shattered these claims by definitively identifying certain items as belonging to him, contradictions that rang out like gunshots in the investigation, each one undermining the carefully constructed wall of family solidarity. The flashlight evidence became particularly crucial because of its potential connection to the head trauma that investigators believed had been inflicted on JonBenet. A heavy-duty flashlight, if wielded with sufficient force, could certainly cause the type of devastating injury that had been discovered during the autopsy. The fact that such a flashlight was found at the scene, wiped clean of fingerprints, suggested that it might have been the weapon used in the crime. Burke's vague recollection about whether he had used a flashlight that night suddenly took on sinister implications. Was this genuine memory loss, or was it a carefully calculated response designed to maintain plausible deniability? These contradictions become particularly significant when you consider that John and Patsy were being questioned by investigators who possessed access to grand jury information and were asking pointed questions based on that secret knowledge, like hunters who already knew where their prey was hiding, but were waiting to see if their quarry would walk into the trap voluntarily. The grand jury had heard testimony and examined evidence that the public would never see, creating a dynamic where investigators could test the family's responses against information they knew to be true or false. Burke's subsequent confirmations of ownership regarding items his parents had denied knowing about suggests that information revealed during his grand jury testimony may have influenced his later public statements, potentially explaining why the grand jury reached certain conclusions in their deliberations, conclusions that remain sealed, like secrets in a tomb, protected by legal barriers that continue to frustrate those seeking justice. The baseball bat controversy exemplifies this pattern of family contradictions. Initially, John and Patsy claimed no knowledge of the bat found near the butler's kitchen, insisting it didn't belong to their family. This denial seemed designed to distance them from yet another potential piece of evidence. However, Burke later contradicted his parents' statements, definitively claiming ownership of the bat and describing how he had used it for playing in the yard. This contradiction wasn't just embarrassing, it was potentially devastating to the family's credibility, suggesting that they were willing to lie about even seemingly minor details if they thought those lies might protect them from suspicion. When innocent play becomes something darker, the shadows of doubt began to lengthen as investigators peered deeper into the behavioral patterns that emerged from the Ramsey household like dark secrets slowly surfacing from the depths of a murky lake. What appeared on the surface to be innocent childhood mischief began to reveal layers of complexity that would disturb even seasoned detectives who had seen the worst that humanity could offer. The investigation had reached a critical juncture where every childhood incident, every sibling interaction, every moment of typical family dysfunction suddenly took on sinister undertones. Investigators found themselves walking through a psychological minefield where normal childhood behaviors could either exonerate or condemn depending on how they were interpreted through the lens of a horrific crime. Child psychologists brought into the case faced an unprecedented challenge. How do you analyze the behavior of a 9-year-old boy whose childhood had been forever altered by trauma and suspicion? The Ramsey household had always presented itself as a model of American success, yet investigators began to wonder if this perfect facade had concealed deeper problems, whether the pressure to maintain appearances had created an environment where normal childhood conflicts were suppressed and left to fester. The golf club incident that Burke admits to, which he characterizes as purely accidental, raises haunting questions about the true nature of sibling interactions and whether this was genuinely an isolated event lost in the mists of childhood memory. While Burke maintains with unwavering certainty that hitting JonBenet with the golf club was purely accidental, describing with almost clinical precision how she was standing behind him when he took a swing, as if he had rehearsed this explanation countless times, this incident aligns perfectly with observations made by family friend Judith Phillips, who noted that Burke seemed to harbor a bad attitude around that time period, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon of an otherwise peaceful landscape. The golf club incident becomes even more significant when examined within the context of child development and sibling rivalry. The deliberate nature of a golf swing, requiring wind-up, aim, and follow-through, makes it difficult to accept as a completely innocent accident. If we accept Burke's version that this was the only time he ever acted out in frustration toward his sister, it would mean that JonBenet's behavior on that particular occasion was significant enough to provoke such a reaction from her normally composed brother. However, this raises the chilling possibility that if JonBenet was indeed being particularly annoying or provocative, as some have whispered in dark corners of speculation, then her behavior patterns might have been a recurring source of frustration that could lead to impulsive reactions from her brother on multiple occasions, a powder keg waiting for the right spark to ignite into something catastrophic. Detective Fred Patterson's initial interview with Burke took place in the golden hours immediately following the discovery, when the full scope of evidence and potential questions had not yet crystallized in investigators' minds like ice forming on a winter pond. Patterson was essentially working blind on day one, operating in the chaos and confusion that always accompanies the initial response to a major crime, asking basic questions about whether Burke knew what had happened to his sister without having the benefit of forensic results, timeline analysis, or the deeper investigative insights that would emerge, like photographs in a dark room over the coming days and weeks. This early timing meant that if someone had indeed spent the entire night preparing responses and coaching a child on what to say, whispering instructions like a puppet master pulling strings in the shadows, those prepared answers would have been perfectly adequate to satisfy the initial questioning from investigators who were still trying to understand the basic facts of the case. The possibility that Burke might have received coaching or preparation time could explain why his responses seemed so definitive and polished, why he appeared to have no knowledge of the events, even though the investigation was still in its infancy and many crucial questions had not yet been formulated in investigators' minds. After that first interview, access to Burke became increasingly restricted, and the family's behavior patterns showed a transformation as dramatic as Jekyll and Hyde. shifting from apparent cooperation to calculated resistance. The Ramseys initially appeared willing to work with law enforcement, as evidenced by their CNN interview and early interactions with investigators, but this openness vanished like morning mist as they became more reliant on legal representation, a fortress of attorneys rising around them like medieval walls designed to keep intruders at bay. They began missing scheduled interviews like appointments with their own conscience, failing to keep commitments to investigators who were working around the clock to solve their daughter's case, and requiring attorney presence for any interactions with law enforcement, as if the lawyers were bodyguards protecting them from the truth itself rather than legal advisors helping them navigate a complex situation. This pattern of behavior represents a seismic shift from their initial approach and suggests a calculated decision to limit exposure and control information flow with surgical precision, treating each interaction with law enforcement as a potential threat rather than an opportunity to aid the investigation. The transformation from relatively open communication to heavily guarded, attorney-mediated interactions indicates a strategic shift that goes beyond normal grief responses and suggests concerns about legal liability that extended well beyond the initial shock of the crime, concerns that seem to grow stronger with each passing day, like shadows lengthening toward dusk. The truth may never be legally proven, but the shadows of that truth continue to darken everything they fall upon. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more storytelling analysis like this.